David Chen had always dreamed of waking up to the sound of water lapping against the shore. After 35 years of working as a high school math teacher, he finally had enough saved up to make that dream come true. His wife Linda, a retired nurse, had been equally excited about finding their perfect retirement home. When they first saw the house on Maple Street in Willow Creek Estates, they knew it was the one. The two-story colonial sat just 2 blocks from Lake Serenity, with its sparkling blue water and peaceful walking trails. The real estate agent, a friendly woman named Carol, had been very clear about one of the property's best features. "You'll love this," Carol had said, jingling a set of bronze keys. "These give you access to the private beach area. It's exclusive to homeowners in this section of the neighborhood. Most people would pay extra just for lake access, but it comes with your house." David had looked at the contract carefully. Right there in black and white, it mentioned lake access rights. The previous owner, an elderly gentleman named Robert, had lived there for 20 years and confirmed that the keys had always been part of the deal. "I use those keys every morning for my walk," Robert had told them during the final walkthrough. "The HOA keeps the beach area nice and clean. You'll really enjoy it." The moving process had been smooth. Their new neighbors seemed friendly enough, waving hello when David and Linda took their evening walks around the neighborhood. The houses were well maintained, and the common areas looked pristine. It felt like the kind of place where people took pride in their community. Linda loved the kitchen with its big windows overlooking their backyard garden. David was thrilled with the basement workshop where he could finally build the birdhouses he'd been planning for years. But the best part of each day was their morning routine. Every day at 7 o'clock, David and Linda would walk down Maple Street, turn left on Oak Avenue, and head toward the lake. The private gate stood at the end of a tree-lined path, painted forest green to blend in with the surrounding woods. David would use the bronze key to unlock the heavy gate, and they'd step into what felt like their own private paradise. The beach area wasn't huge, but it was perfectly maintained. A small dock extended into the water with 2 wooden benches facing the lake. Someone had planted wildflowers along the shoreline, and the grass was always neatly trimmed. In the early morning hours, they often had the place to themselves, watching the sunrise paint the water in shades of gold and pink. "I can't believe this is really ours," Linda would say, settling onto their favorite bench. David would nod, breathing in the fresh air and listening to the gentle sounds of the water. After decades of alarm clocks and crowded hallways, this peaceful start to each day felt like a gift. They'd been living in the house for about 3 weeks when they first met Janet Walsh, the HOA president. She'd knocked on their door one Saturday afternoon, carrying a welcome basket filled with local honey and homemade cookies. "I wanted to introduce myself properly," Janet had said with a warm smile. "I live just around the corner on Pine Street. We're so happy to have you in the neighborhood." Janet was probably in her early 60s with perfectly styled gray hair and the kind of outfit that looked expensive but understated. She'd complimented their front garden and mentioned how nice it was to see younger people moving into the community. "Well, younger is relative," David had laughed. "We're both retired now." "Oh, you're practically kids compared to some of us," Janet had replied. "Have you had a chance to explore the lake area yet?" "We love our morning walks down there," Linda had said. "It's so peaceful, wonderful. That's one of our crown jewels. We work hard to keep it nice for everyone." Janet had paused, then added, "You'll get an invitation to our next HOA meeting. We like to keep everyone informed about what's happening in the community." The conversation had been pleasant and welcoming. Janet seemed genuinely interested in getting to know them and had even offered to introduce them to other neighbors. Over the next few months, David and Linda settled into a comfortable routine. David spent his mornings working in the garden, while Linda volunteered at the local library. They'd discovered a great farmers market on Saturdays and had even joined a book club that met at the community center. The lake remained their favorite part of each day. They'd learned the best times to avoid crowds and had started bringing a thermos of coffee to enjoy on the dock. David had begun taking photographs of the changing seasons reflected in the water, while Linda collected interesting stones and feathers for craft projects. Their relationship with the HOA seemed smooth enough. They'd attended 2 meetings, where Janet had discussed routine maintenance issues and upcoming community events. The monthly dues were reasonable and the services seemed fair. David had even volunteered to help with the annual neighborhood barbecue. "You two are exactly the kind of residents we love to have," Janet had told them after one meeting. Active, responsible, and clearly invested in the community. Other homeowners had been equally welcoming. The couple next door, Pete and Carol, often stopped to chat when they were all outside working in their yards. The retired doctor across the street always waved when he walked his golden retriever past their house. David had started a small vegetable garden in their backyard, sharing tomatoes and peppers with neighbors who appreciated fresh produce. Linda had joined the neighborhood book club and was helping organize a community garage sale for the spring. Everything felt perfect. They'd found their dream retirement home in a friendly community with access to the beautiful lake they'd always wanted. The stress of their working years was fading, replaced by lazy mornings, good books, and the simple pleasure of watching the seasons change over the water. 6 months after moving in, David and Linda felt completely at home in Willow Creek Estates. They'd painted the guest bedroom, upgraded the kitchen appliances, and were already planning which improvements to tackle next year. The bronze keys to the lake had become as much a part of their daily routine as brushing their teeth. Neither of them suspected that their peaceful new life was about to be turned upside down by a knock on their door that would change everything. The knock came on a Tuesday morning while David was watering his tomato plants. He could see Janet Walsh through the front window, holding what looked like an official envelope. She wasn't smiling the way she usually did when they ran into each other around the neighborhood. "Good morning, Janet," David said as he opened the door. "How are you doing?" "I'm fine, thank you." Her voice sounded different somehow, more formal. "I need to speak with you and Linda about an important matter." "Is she home?" Linda appeared from the kitchen, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Hi, Janet, would you like to come in for some coffee?" "This won't take long," Janet replied, staying on the front porch. "I'm here about your lake access situation." David felt a small knot form in his stomach. "Our lake access situation?" Janet opened the envelope and pulled out several official-looking documents. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding about those keys you've been using. The previous owner shouldn't have given them to you without proper authorization." "I'm sorry, what do you mean?" Linda asked, stepping closer to David. "The lake access keys are not automatically transferred with house sales," Janet explained, reading from one of the papers. "New residents must apply for access through the proper channels and be approved by the HOA board." David stared at her in confusion. "But it's written right in our purchase contract. Lake access rights come with the property." "I understand why you might think that," Janet said, her tone becoming more businesslike. "But that contract language is outdated. The HOA bylaws have been updated since then, and current regulations take precedence over old property descriptions." Linda crossed her arms. "Janet, we've been using those keys for 6 months. Why is this coming up now?" "We've been doing a comprehensive review of all lake access permissions. Several homeowners have been using outdated authorizations." Janet held out her hand. "I'll need you to return the keys today so we can straighten this out." David felt his jaw drop. "Return the keys? But we use them every morning. It's one of the main reasons we bought this house." "I understand this is inconvenient," Janet replied, though her expression suggested she didn't really care about their inconvenience. "But rules are rules. You can submit an application for new access and the board will review it at our next meeting." "When is the next meeting?" Linda asked. 3 weeks from now. Then there's a mandatory waiting period for background checks and property compliance reviews. The whole process usually takes about 2 to 3 months. David couldn't believe what he was hearing. 2 to 3 months? "Janet, we've been good neighbors. We've followed all the rules, paid our dues on time, and participated in community activities. Why would our application be anything but automatic approval?" Janet's expression hardened slightly. "Nothing is automatic, David. The board takes lake access very seriously. We have to consider factors like property maintenance standards, community involvement, and whether applicants demonstrate the right kind of commitment to our neighborhood values." "What exactly does that mean?" Linda asked, her voice getting sharper. "It means the board needs to be confident that lake access privileges won't be abused. We've had problems in the past with people who didn't respect the facility properly." David felt heat rising in his chest. "Have we done anything to suggest we don't respect the lake area? We've never left trash, we've never been loud, and we've always locked the gate behind us." "This isn't personal," Janet said, though everything about her tone suggested it was becoming exactly that. "It's simply policy. Everyone has to follow the same procedures." Linda stepped forward. If everyone has to follow the same procedures, how did the previous owner have keys for 20 years without going through this process? Different times, different rules, Janet replied curtly. We're much more organized now than we used to be. David pulled out his phone. I think I need to call our real estate agent. Carol specifically told us that lake access was included with the house. If there was some kind of mistake, she needs to know about it. You can call whoever you want, Janet said, her patience clearly wearing thin. But the keys need to be returned today. That's not negotiable. And if we don't return them? David asked. Janet's smile returned, but it wasn't friendly anymore. Then we'd have to consider this a violation of HOA regulations. Violations come with fines, and repeated violations can result in legal action. Linda looked shocked. Legal action? Over keys that came with our house? Keys that were improperly distributed, Janet corrected. Look, I'm trying to handle this nicely. We could have started with violation notices and fines, but I thought it would be better to approach you directly first. David felt like he was in some kind of weird dream. 6 months ago, Janet had been bringing them welcome baskets and praising them as ideal residents. Now she was threatening legal action over something that had been explicitly included in their property purchase. Janet, can we at least have a few days to sort this out with our attorney? Linda asked. This is all very sudden. Your attorney? Janet's eyebrows shot up. That seems like an extreme reaction to a simple administrative matter. Simple? David couldn't help but raise his voice slightly. You're demanding we give up something we paid for, based on rules you claim override our legal property contract. How is that simple? Lower your voice, please, Janet said, glancing around as if she was worried the neighbors might hear. There's no need to get emotional about this. We're not getting emotional, Linda replied. We're trying to understand how our property rights can suddenly disappear because of new rules we were never told about. Janet sighed dramatically. This is exactly the kind of attitude that makes the application process necessary. The board needs to know that lake access holders will be cooperative and respectful of community decisions. David felt his anger rising, but he forced himself to speak calmly. Janet, we've been nothing but cooperative and respectful. We've participated in every community event. We've volunteered for neighborhood projects, and we've never caused any problems. What exactly are you worried about? I'm worried about maintaining the standards that make this community special, Janet replied. Standards that require everyone to follow proper procedures, regardless of what they think they're entitled to. The word entitled hung in the air like an insult. Linda's face was getting red, and David could tell she was fighting to control her temper. We're not asking for special treatment, Linda said through gritted teeth. We're asking to keep something that was legally included with our property purchase, and I'm telling you that what you think was legal inclusion is actually an administrative error that needs to be corrected. Janet folded the papers back into the envelope. The keys, please. David looked at Linda, then back at Janet. Everything about this felt wrong, but he wasn't sure what their options were. If we give you the keys now, can you guarantee our application will be approved? I can't guarantee anything, Janet replied. That would be inappropriate. The board has to evaluate each application on its merits. Based on what criteria? Linda asked. That's board business. The criteria are discussed in executive session. David realized they were getting nowhere. Janet, I'm not comfortable handing over the keys until we've had a chance to review our legal position. Give us a week to talk to our attorney and understand what's happening here. Janet's friendly mask finally slipped completely. Fine. But understand that every day you continue using those keys without proper authorization is a separate violation. The fines start at $50 per day and increase from there. She turned and walked away without saying goodbye, leaving David and Linda standing in their doorway, stunned by what had just happened. What just happened? Linda asked quietly. David closed the door and leaned against it. I have no idea, but I don't think this is really about administrative errors. The first violation notice appeared in their mailbox 3 days later. David stared at the official letterhead in disbelief as he read the complaint. Mailbox positioned 4.2 inches beyond approved setback guidelines. He walked to the end of their driveway and looked at their mailbox. It was identical to every other mailbox on the street, positioned exactly where the previous owner had placed it 20 years ago. He pulled out his phone and took pictures, then walked down the block to compare. Their mailbox was actually set back further than most of their neighbors. This is ridiculous, Linda said when he showed her the notice. They're obviously targeting us. The fine is $75 if we don't fix it within 7 days, David read. Fix what exactly? Move our mailbox to match everyone else's mailbox? That weekend, David spent 2 hours with a measuring tape and a level, repositioning their mailbox to match the exact placement of their neighbors. He took detailed photos documenting the work and submitted a compliance report to the HOA office. The second violation notice came the following Tuesday. This time it was about their garden gnome. Decorative garden elements must comply with community aesthetic guidelines, Linda read aloud. Gnomes and similar whimsical decorations are considered inconsistent with the neighborhood's upscale character. David looked out at their front garden, where a small ceramic gnome sat among Linda's carefully tended flowers. We bought that gnome at the neighborhood garage sale. Mrs. Peterson from Pine Street was selling it. And look at this, Linda pointed to the bottom of the notice. If we don't remove it within 5 days, the fine is $100. David walked outside and counted 17 garden gnomes, fairy houses, and decorative frogs visible from their front yard alone. The house directly across the street had an entire family of ceramic rabbits arranged around their mailbox. When he called the HOA office to point out the inconsistency, the receptionist told him that enforcement priorities change based on current board focus areas. What does that even mean? David asked. I'm sorry, sir. I just answer the phones. You'll need to speak with Mrs. Walsh about policy questions. David left 3 messages for Janet. She never called back. The third violation notice arrived on Friday, claiming their car was improperly parked in their own driveway. According to the notice, vehicles had to be parked in accordance with aesthetic positioning guidelines to maintain uniform street appearance. Linda threw the paper down on the kitchen table. Our car is parked in our driveway facing the same direction as every other car in the neighborhood. What's improper about that? David studied their neighbors' driveways. Maybe we're supposed to park closer to the garage door? Or further away? I honestly can't tell what they want. He spent an hour that evening moving their car to different positions in the driveway, taking photos at each location. Finally, he parked it exactly how it had been before and decided to ignore the violation. The harassment was becoming a weekly routine. Monday would bring a new complaint about something that had never been a problem before. Wednesday would bring a follow-up notice with increased fines if the mysterious violation wasn't corrected immediately. Friday would bring a new complaint about something completely different. Their gate remained locked. Every morning, David and Linda would walk to the lake and stand outside the green gate, watching other neighbors come and go with their own bronze keys. The daily routine that had brought them so much joy was now a source of frustration and sadness. I feel like we're being punished for asking questions, Linda said one morning as they stood looking through the gate at the empty beach. Because we are being punished, David replied. This isn't about rules or procedures. This is personal. The social isolation was almost worse than the violation notices. Neighbors who had been friendly just weeks before now avoided eye contact when they passed on the street. Pete and Carol next door stopped coming outside when David and Linda were in their yard. The book club meeting suddenly became full, with no room for new members. David overheard part of a conversation at the grocery store that made his stomach turn. 2 women from their neighborhood were discussing the troublemakers on Maple Street, who were causing problems for everyone. I heard they're threatening to sue the HOA, one woman said. Some people just don't understand how communities work, the other replied. If you don't like the rules, you shouldn't move to a place with an HOA. David wanted to interrupt and explain that they weren't causing problems or threatening anyone, but he realized it wouldn't matter. The narrative had already been written, and they were the villains in Janet's version of events. The isolation became even more apparent during their weekly trips to the farmer's market. Vendors who had been chatty and friendly now served them politely, but without the warm conversation they'd enjoyed before. David suspected that word was spreading beyond their immediate neighborhood. It's like we have some kind of contagious disease, Linda said after a particularly awkward encounter at the bakery stand. The violation notices kept coming. Their flower garden was inconsistent with approved color schemes. Their outdoor doormat featured non-compliant decorative patterns. Even their porch light was suddenly the wrong shade of white for the neighborhood standards. Each notice came with escalating fines and increasingly threatening language about continued non-compliance and legal remedies available to the association. David started keeping a detailed file of every notice, every photograph, and every attempt he made to comply with the ever-changing requirements. The folder grew thicker each week, and he began to realize they were dealing with something much more serious than simple administrative overzealousness. The final straw came when Linda's elderly mother visited for a week. Helen was 83 years old and had been looking forward to seeing their new home for months. The day after she arrived, a violation notice appeared citing extended guest violations and threatening daily fines of $200 for unauthorized long-term visitors. Long-term visitors? Linda was furious. She's been here for 3 days and she's my mother. David read through their HOA documents again, searching for any mention of guest restrictions. He found nothing about time limits for family visitors. When he called to question the violation, the receptionist told him that guest policies were covered under general community standards and didn't need to be specifically written down. So, we're supposed to follow rules that aren't written anywhere? David asked. You're supposed to use common sense and community consideration, the receptionist replied. That evening, David sat in his basement workshop, staring at the half-finished birdhouses he'd been so excited to build. The peaceful retirement he and Linda had planned was turning into a nightmare of constant stress and conflict. They were afraid to check their mailbox, afraid to park their car, afraid to have friends visit. We need to call a lawyer, Linda said when he came upstairs. This has gone way beyond reasonable HOA management, David nodded. I've been thinking the same thing. But I'm worried about what it might cost, and I'm worried about making things even worse. How could things get worse? Linda asked. We're already being treated like criminals for owning a house we legally purchased. David looked out the window toward the lake, where the evening sun was painting the water in beautiful shades of orange and gold. 6 months ago, that view had represented everything they'd worked for. Now it felt like a cruel reminder of what they'd lost. You're right, he said finally. Tomorrow I'm calling every lawyer in town until I find someone who understands HOA law. What they didn't know was that their decision to fight back would uncover secrets that went far deeper than petty harassment and power-hungry board members. David spent most of Wednesday morning on the phone, calling every law office within 50 miles. Most attorneys either didn't handle HOA disputes or were too busy to take new clients. By noon, he was starting to feel desperate when he reached the office of Patricia Wells, a lawyer who specialized in property and community association law. Mr. Chen, Patricia said during their phone consultation, what you're describing sounds like harassment, not legitimate rule enforcement. Can you bring all your documentation to my office tomorrow afternoon? When David and Linda met with Patricia the next day, they brought 3 thick folders containing every violation notice, every photograph, and every piece of correspondence they'd received from the HOA. Patricia spent an hour reviewing the materials, occasionally making notes or asking clarifying questions. This is interesting, she said finally, looking up from the papers. Have you researched when the current HOA board was elected? No, David replied. Should we have? Well, according to your HOA's own bylaws, board elections are supposed to happen every 2 years. Janet Walsh has been president for over 4 years, with no recorded election during that time. Linda leaned forward. What does that mean? It might mean the current board has no legal authority to make the decisions they've been making. Patricia pulled out a legal pad and started making a list. I'm also seeing some irregularities in how they've been handling your situation. The violation notices don't reference specific bylaw sections. The fines don't match the penalty structure in your governing documents, and some of the rules they're trying to enforce don't appear to exist anywhere in writing. David felt a spark of hope for the first time in weeks. So we might actually have a case? You might have a very good case, Patricia replied. But I need to do some deeper research first. I want to review your property deed, examine the HOA's corporate filings with the state, and look into their financial records. Financial records? Linda asked. HOAs are required to maintain transparent financial records and make them available to homeowners upon request. If they're operating improperly in one area, there might be problems in other areas too. Patricia requested copies of the HOA's financial statements, meeting minutes, and corporate registration documents. When Janet Walsh refused to provide them, citing confidentiality concerns, Patricia filed a formal legal demand. Homeowners have a legal right to review these documents, Patricia explained. The fact that they're refusing to comply is actually quite telling. While they waited for the HOA to respond to the legal demand, Patricia continued her investigation. What she discovered was more disturbing than anyone had expected. The HOA hasn't filed required annual reports with the state for 3 years, she told David and Linda during their follow-up meeting. Their corporate status is technically suspended, which means they don't have legal authority to enforce rules or collect fines. But they've been collecting our monthly dues, David said. That's the interesting part. The dues are being deposited into accounts controlled by Walsh Property Management, which happens to be owned by Janet Walsh herself. She's essentially been running the HOA as her personal business. Linda's jaw dropped. Is that legal? Not even close. HOA funds are supposed to be held in trust for the community, with detailed accounting and oversight. What she's been doing could constitute embezzlement. Patricia had also discovered something else troubling. Over the past 3 years, 5 other families in Willow Creek Estates had been forced to sell their homes due to escalating HOA disputes. In each case, the families had been targeted with increasing violation notices and fines until they couldn't afford to fight anymore. Here's the really suspicious part, Patricia continued. All 5 properties were purchased by something called Lakeview Investment Holdings within weeks of the families moving out. The purchase prices were significantly below market value. Who owns Lakeview Investment Holdings? David asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Janet Walsh and her business partner, a man named Robert Torres. They've been buying properties at distressed prices, then turning around and renting them as vacation properties for premium rates. The pieces were starting to come together. Janet wasn't just power-hungry. She was running a systematic scheme to force out homeowners and acquire their properties at bargain prices. The HOA harassment was just the tool she used to make life unbearable for families she wanted to target. Why us? Linda asked. What made them choose our house? Patricia pulled out a map of the neighborhood. Look at this. Your property and the 5 others they've acquired all have one thing in common: direct lake access. These are the most valuable lots in the community, and they've been systematically targeting them. David stared at the map, feeling sick. So our lake access keys were never really the issue. They wanted our house. Exactly. The key dispute was just the beginning of a harassment campaign designed to make you give up, and Patricia filed an injunction to stop the HOA from issuing any more violation notices or fines while the legal issues were being resolved. She also filed a complaint with the State Attorney General's office about potential fraud and embezzlement. What happens now? Linda asked. Now we wait for the state to investigate and we prepare our own lawsuit for damages. You've been subjected to months of harassment. Your property rights have been violated, and your quality of life has been destroyed by illegal actions. The injunction was granted within a week. Judge Morrison reviewed the evidence and issued a temporary restraining order preventing the HOA from taking any enforcement actions against David and Linda until the underlying legal issues could be resolved. But Janet Walsh wasn't finished fighting. 2 days after the injunction was issued, David received a phone call from their mortgage company. Mr. Chen, we've received some concerning correspondence from your homeowners association, the loan officer said. They're claiming there are serious compliance issues with your property that could affect its value and marketability. David's heart sank. What kind of compliance issues? According to their letter, you're in violation of multiple community standards, and there are questions about the validity of certain property rights that were included in your original purchase. David immediately called Patricia. Can they do this? Can they contact our mortgage company and make false claims about our property? They can try, Patricia replied grimly. But it's another violation of proper procedures and could constitute defamation. I'll contact your mortgage company directly and explain the legal situation. Patricia's call to the mortgage company helped clarify the situation, but the damage was already being done. Word was spreading through the community that David and Linda were involved in major legal disputes that could affect property values throughout the neighborhood. People are starting to blame us for everything, Linda said after a particularly uncomfortable encounter at the post office. They think we're the ones causing problems. The social isolation was becoming harder to bear than the legal harassment had been. David and Linda found themselves avoiding local businesses and community events where they might face hostile Neighbors who'd been fed misinformation about their situation. I keep wondering if we should just sell the house and move somewhere else, Linda said one evening. Is it worth all this stress and conflict? David understood the temptation to give up, but he was also angry at the injustice of it all. If we give up now, they win. And the next family that moves into a house with lake access will go through the same thing. Patricia had been thinking along the same lines. This isn't just about your situation anymore, she told them during their next meeting. If Walsh has been running this scheme for years, there could be other victims who don't even realize they were targeted illegally. She'd been in contact with the 5 families who had been forced to sell their homes. 2 of them were interested in joining a class action lawsuit, and a third was considering moving back to the area if their property rights could be restored. The state investigation is moving forward too, Patricia added. They're looking into the financial irregularities and they've requested documentation going back 5 years. David felt cautiously optimistic for the first time since the whole nightmare began. Do you think we have a real chance of winning this? I think Janet Walsh has made some very serious legal mistakes, Patricia replied. And I think she's about to find out that targeting the wrong people can have consequences she never expected. What none of them knew was that the state investigation would uncover evidence of crimes far more serious than anyone had imagined. The police cars arrived on Maple Street at 6:30 on a Thursday morning. David was making coffee when he saw the flashing lights through the kitchen window. 3 marked patrol cars and 2 unmarked sedans were parked in front of Janet Walsh's house around the corner. Linda, come look at this, he called. They watched from their front window as officers in bulletproof vests approached Janet's door. Within minutes, she emerged in handcuffs, wearing a bathrobe and looking completely shocked. A man David didn't recognize was led out behind her, also in handcuffs. David's phone rang. It was Patricia Wells. Are you watching the news? She asked without preamble. We're watching it happen, David replied. The police just arrested Janet Walsh. Turn on Channel 7, Detective. Morrison is holding a press conference about a multi-million-dollar real estate fraud scheme. David grabbed the remote and found the local news station. Detective Lisa Morrison was standing in front of the police station, surrounded by reporters and microphones. This morning, officers arrested Janet Walsh, age 62, and Robert Torres, age 57, on charges including conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, identity theft, and embezzlement, Detective Morrison announced. The investigation began following complaints from residents of Willow Creek Estates about potential HOA misconduct. Linda sank into the couch. Identity theft? The detective continued. Our investigation revealed that the defendants were operating a sophisticated scheme targeting homeowners in multiple communities across the county. Using their positions in homeowners associations, they would systematically harass residents until they were forced to sell their properties at below-market prices. David felt his knees go weak. Multiple communities? The scheme involved creating shell companies to purchase distressed properties, then converting them to short-term vacation rentals. Over the past 5 years, we believe they acquired at least 23 properties through fraudulent means, generating over $4 million in illegal profits. The press conference revealed details that stunned David and Linda. Janet and Robert had been running similar operations in 4 different HOA communities. They would target properties with valuable amenities like lake access, golf course views, or large lots. Then they would manufacture HOA violations and harassment campaigns to drive out the owners. The identity theft charges relate to the defendants' use of fake documents and forged signatures to validate illegal bylaw changes and authorize unauthorized financial transactions, Detective Morrison explained. They also created false contractor invoices and maintenance bills to justify withdrawing money from HOA accounts. Patricia called back an hour later with more details. The state found evidence that Janet had been forging board meeting minutes and election results for years. There haven't been legitimate HOA elections in Willow Creek Estates since 2019, so she really had no legal authority to do any of the things she did to us, Linda said. None whatsoever. She was essentially running a criminal enterprise using the HOA as a front. Patricia paused. There's more. The financial investigation found that she'd been skimming money from the community maintenance funds. That's why the common areas and amenities were starting to look run down. David thought about the beach area by the lake. which had indeed seemed less well-maintained in recent months. How much money are we talking about? Over $600,000 missing from various HOA accounts across the 4 communities she controlled. The vacation rental business was just one part of the operation. The news coverage continued throughout the day. By evening, reporters were interviewing neighbors and former HOA board members who were learning about the fraud for the first time. Many residents expressed shock and disbelief that someone they'd trusted with their community had been systematically stealing from them. David and Linda were contacted by several news outlets, wanting to interview them as the complainants, whose legal action had triggered the investigation. They decided to speak with Channel 7's investigative reporter, hoping to set the record straight about what had really happened. "We never wanted to cause trouble for anyone," Linda explained to the reporter. "We just wanted to understand why our property rights were suddenly being questioned. If we hadn't stood up for ourselves, this fraud would have continued indefinitely," David added. "Other families would have lost their homes and the community would have kept losing money." The interview aired that evening, and the response was immediate. David's phone started ringing with calls from neighbors apologizing for how they'd been treated during the harassment campaign. Pete from next door was one of the first to call. "David, I owe you and Linda a huge apology. We had no idea what was really going on. Janet told everyone you were trying to sue the HOA and cause problems for the whole community." "We understand," David replied. "She was very convincing, and she was in a position of authority that people trusted." Similar calls came throughout the evening and the next few days. The book club president called to invite Linda back to the group. The farmers market vendors began treating them warmly again. Even the grocery store clerk, who had been cold to them for months, apologized and explained that she'd heard terrible things about them that she now realized were lies. The legal resolution moved quickly once the criminal charges were filed. The court invalidated all of Janet's HOA actions taken without proper authority, which meant David and Linda's lake access rights were fully restored. All the violation notices and fines were declared null and void. More importantly, the court ordered the return of all money stolen from the HOA accounts, plus damages for the affected homeowners. David and Linda were awarded compensation for their legal fees, emotional distress, and the harassment they'd endured. The judge was particularly angry about the mortgage company contact, Patricia explained. That crossed the line from harassment into potential financial fraud, since it could have affected your credit and your ability to refinance or sell your home. The 5 families who had been forced to sell their homes were offered the opportunity to repurchase their properties at the original sale prices, with all closing costs paid by the court-ordered restitution fund. 3 of the families decided to return to Willow Creek Estates. New HOA elections were held within 60 days, with court-supervised oversight to ensure legitimacy. David was surprised when several neighbors asked him to run for the board. "I think we need people who actually understand what the rules are supposed to be," said Carol Peterson, the woman who had sold them the garden gnome that had caused one of their first violation notices. David declined to run for the board, but he did volunteer to help review and update the HOA's governing documents to prevent future abuse. The new board voted unanimously to implement transparency requirements and regular financial audits. 6 months after Janet's arrest, David and Linda were finally able to enjoy the retirement they'd originally planned. Their morning walks to the lake resumed, and the bronze keys were once again a symbol of the peaceful life they'd worked so hard to achieve. The beach area was restored to its former beauty, using funds recovered from the criminal restitution. New benches were installed, the landscaping was refreshed, and a small plaque was placed near the gate recognizing the importance of community accountability and resident rights. "It's funny," Linda said one morning as they sat on their favorite bench watching the sunrise. 6 months ago, I wanted to sell this house and move as far away from here as possible. And now?" David asked. "Now I think this is exactly where we're supposed to be. We helped stop something terrible from happening to other people. And we ended up with a stronger community because of it." David nodded, thinking about the new neighbors who had moved into the houses that had been illegally acquired by Janet's scheme. Young families with children who were already enjoying the lake, accessing community amenities that had been preserved because someone had been willing to fight for what was right. The bronze keys felt good in his hand as they left the beach that morning, But what felt even better was knowing that those keys now represented something more than just access to a beautiful lake. They represented the importance of standing up for justice, even when it's difficult and scary. As they walked home along Maple Street, David realized that their dream retirement had turned out to be everything they'd hoped for and more. They had their peaceful mornings by the lake, but they also had the satisfaction of knowing they'd helped protect their community from people who would exploit it. Sometimes the best victories are the ones that make life better for everyone, not just yourself.